If I ask you right now to name the biggest health threat as you get older, you'd probably say heart disease or cancer. Almost nobody says losing muscles. And yet, sarcopenia is one of the most powerful predictors of disability, falls, and premature deaths. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why muscle loss might be the most underappreciated health crisis we are facing. I'm Dr. Max. I'm a physical therapist, but I spend my time deep in medical research because I'm obsessed with what actually keeps people healthy versus what breaks them down. And after years of studying the mechanism of healthy aging, I need to tell you something urgent. After age 30, if you take no action to prevent it, you'll lose between 3 to 8% of your muscle mass every single decade. That rate accelerates after 60. By the age of 80, many people have lost almost 30 to 40% of their peak muscle mass, and almost nobody talks about it. Not your doctor, not public health campaigns, not the mainstream media. So, what is muscle actually doing in your body beyond moving your skeleton? The answer is, when you dig into the physiology, muscle is doing something far more profound than just contracting. Muscle is an endocrine organ. That means it secretes hormones, specifically signaling molecules called myokines, that regulates metabolism throughout your entire body. One of the most studied myokines is irisin. When muscle contracts during exercises, irisin gets released into your bloodstream. Research shows that irisin converts white fat, the regular energy storing fat, into brown fat, which burns calories to generate your body heat. Your muscle is literally telling your fat tissues to become metabolically active. But here's where it gets even more critical. Muscle tissue is the largest glucose sink in your body. After you eat a meal containing carbs, your blood glucose rises. Insulin signals your cells to absorb that glucose. Where does most of it go? They go into your skeletal muscle. In a metabolically healthy person with adequate muscle mass, muscle absorbs roughly 80% of glucose from the bloodstream following a meal. When you lose muscle mass, you lose glucose disposal capacity. Blood sugars stays elevated longer, and your pancreas has to secrete more insulin to compensate. Over time, that creates insulin resistance, the foundation of type 2 diabetes. A study tracking over 13,000 adults for nearby a decade found that for every 10% increase in skeletal muscle mass, there was an 11% reduction in insulin resistance and a 12% reduction in pre-diabetes risk. This is why two people can weigh exactly the same, but one develops diabetes while the other doesn't. The difference comes down to body composition. One person has more muscle, better glucose disposal, and lower insulin resistance, while the other has less muscle, poor glucose handling, and elevated insulin levels is slowing damaging their metabolism. When you lose muscle mass, your resting metabolic rate drops significantly. For every pounds of muscle loss, you burn approximately 6 to 10 fewer calories per day at rest. That might not sound like much, but over a decade of progressive muscle loss, that's hundreds of fewer calories burned daily. Weight gain becomes easier, weight loss becomes harder. And because that weight gain tends to be fat, not muscle, metabolic dysfunction accelerates. But losing muscle doesn't just affect your metabolism. There's something even more immediately dangerous that most people never see coming. Let me ask you a question. Why are falls one of the leading causes of death in elderly populations? To answer this, let me walk you through the cascade. An 80-year-old with significant muscle loss trips on a sidewalk curb. Their quadriceps aren't strong enough to catch their balance. They fall and they fracture their hip. That hip fracture requires surgery, hospitalization, and weeks to months of immobility during recovery. During that immobility, several things happen. First, muscle loss accelerates dramatically. When you're bedridden, you can lose up to 1 to 2% of your remaining muscle mass per day. In 2 weeks, that's cause 14 to 28% additional muscle loss. Secondly, immobility increases risk of blood clots. Third, lying in bed increases pneumonia risk. And the last one, the stress of surgery can trigger delirium. The statistics are grim. After hip fracture in someone over age 65, the 1-year mortality rate is 20 to 30%. But here's what most people don't realize. Muscle strength is the single best predictor of fall risk. A meta-analysis of 74 studies involving over 35,000 adults found that individuals in the lowest quartile of leg strength had 3.5 times the fall risk compared to those in the highest quartile. Muscle strength mattered more than balance training, more than vision correction, more than home modifications. The mechanism is straightforward. When you start to lose balance, your muscle have milliseconds to fire and stabilize your body. If your quadriceps can't generate enough force to catch you, or if your hip abductors can't stabilize your pelvis, you fall. Strong muscles don't prevent tripping. They prevent tripping from becoming to fall. There is also the can't get up problem. An elderly person falls at home, they aren't seriously injured, but they can't generate enough force to stand back up. They lie on the floor for hours, sometimes days. Unfortunately, falling creates a vicious cycle. Fear of falling leads to reduced activity. Reduced activity accelerates muscle loss, and more muscle loss increases fall risk. It's a downward spiral. Let that sink in for a moment. The tragedy is that this cascade is largely preventable, but you have to build that strength before you need it. Now, here's what public health got completely wrong for decades. Why doesn't walking prevent muscle loss? For decades, public health campaigns focus on one message: move more, walk 10,000 steps, take the stairs, get 150 minutes of moderate activity per week. All of that is good advice for cardiovascular health, but here's what almost nobody mentions. Walking does virtually nothing to preserve muscle mass. This is one of the biggest failures in public health messaging. The advice suggests that staying active will prevent age-related decline, but it won't. Not if that activity exclusively aerobic. Here's why. Muscle tissue responds to a specific stimulus. Mechanical tension under progressive overload. That means you need to challenge muscles with resistance that's difficult enough to trigger an adaptation response. Walking doesn't provide sufficient stimulus. Neither does yoga at typical intensities. Neither does swimming or cycling unless performed at intensities most people never reach. When you challenge a muscle with resistance that exceeds what it's accustomed to, you create microscopic damage to muscle fibers. Your body repairs that damage and builds the muscles slightly stronger. That adaptive response requires progressive overload, gradually increasing the resistance over time. Walking at a comfortable pace doesn't create that stimulus. You're moving the same body weight you move every day. No overload, no adaptation signals, and no muscle growth. A study comparing exercise modalities in older adults found that participants who walk 30 minutes 5 days per week for 12 months showed no significant change in muscle mass. Meanwhile, participants who did resistance training twice per week for the same period increased muscle mass by 2.4 kg over 5 pounds of muscles. Yet, for decades, public health guidelines emphasized cardio, heart health, step counts, muscle preservations was treated as optional. Something for bodybuilders, not regular people. And here's the consequence. An entire generation has walked thousands of miles while their muscle mass steadily declined. But muscle does something else that might shock you. Something most people never connect to physical health at all. Let me ask you a question. What does muscle mass have to do with your brain? Honestly, multiple large-scale studies have found that people who maintain greater muscle mass into older age have significantly lower rates of dementia and cognitive decline. brain. This isn't just correlation, there are clear mechanisms. First, resistance training increases production of brain-derived neuropathic factor, BDNF. This is protein supports the survival of existing neurons and encourages growth of new ones. BDNF is essentially fertilizer to your brain. Research shows that BDNF levels decline with age, and low BDNF is associated with cognitive impairment and neurodegenerative diseases. Resistance training significantly increases BDNF production more so than aerobic exercise alone. A longitudinal study from Rush University tracked over 900 older adults for up to 16 years. They found that individuals in the highest quintile of muscle strength had 60% lower risk of developing Alzheimer's diseases. This means maintaining muscle mass isn't just about physical independences, it's about preserving cognitive independences, your ability to think clearly, remember, and maintain your sense of self as you age. But even if you start training, there is one critical factor most people get completely wrong. How much protein do you actually need? Standard dietary guidelines recommend 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. For a 154 pounds person, that's 56 grams of protein daily. This number was established as the minimum to prevent protein deficiency. It's a floor, not a target. And it's now here near optimal for preserving muscle mass. The research is clear. Older adults need significantly more protein than younger adults. Why? Because aging reduces the efficiency of muscle protein synthesis. This phenomenon is called anabolic resistance. Older muscle doesn't respond as robustly to protein intake as younger muscle does. To overcome this, older adults need 1.2 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of weight, 50 to 150% more than standard recommendations. For that same 154 pound person, that's 84 to 140 grams of protein daily, not 56. When you consume approximately 25 to 40 grams of protein in a single meal, consuming more than that in one sitting doesn't produce additional muscle synthesis. The surplus gets oxidized for energy. This means eating 80 grams of protein at dinner and minimal amounts at breakfast and lunch is less effective than distributing evenly across 3 meals. A University of Texas study compared two groups with identical total protein intake. One group ate 10 grams at breakfast, 15 grams at lunch, and 65 grams at dinner. The other ate 30 grams at each meal. Despite identical totals, the evenly distributed group showed significantly greater muscle protein synthesis throughout the 24-hour period. Most people, especially older adults, don't come close to this. They are undershooting the threshold at breakfast and lunch, then overshooting it at dinner. The result is suboptimal muscle protein synthesis throughout most of the day. Yet, none of these made it into mainstream dietary advice. Here's the message that needs to be shouted from every public health platforms. Let me ask you a question. Is sarcopenia really reversible? Studies consistently show that people in their 70s, 80s, and even 90s can gain significant muscle mass and strength through resistance training. A landmark study published in JAMA recruited nursing home residents aged 87 to 96 years old, people who were frail with multiple chronic conditions. They put them into progressive resistance training program for 10 weeks, just 2 sessions per week. The results were remarkable. Participants increased muscle strength by an average of 113%. Some nearly tripled their strength. Muscle mass increased by 2.7 pounds on average. Several participants who had been using walkers were able to walk independently by the end of this study. If people in their 90s living in nursing homes with multiple health conditions can build significant muscle, then virtually anyone can. The key is progressive overload, gradually increasing the resistance over time. This doesn't require a gym membership. Bodyweight exercises, push-ups, squats, lunges can be progressed. Resistance bands provide scalable resistance at low cost. I want you to focus on fundamental movement patterns: push, pull, and squat. Push like push-ups, overhead press. Pull like rows and pull-ups, and squat like bodyweight squats or goblet squats. Hinge exercises like deadlifts. Carrying something like farmer's carries. 2 to 3 sessions per week, 20 to 30 minutes per session. That's sufficient to maintain and build muscle mass throughout the life. The problem is awareness. Most people don't know this is possible. They've internalized the belief that muscle loss with aging is inevitable. All of those beliefs are false, contradicted by decades of research. They're facing an aging population of losing strength, independence, and metabolic health at rates that could have been substantially migrated with basic resistance training and adequate protein intake. The tragedy is that this was preventable. The research has existed for decades, but public health priorities focused elsewhere. The message was cardiovascular exercises, low-fat diet, and step counts. Muscle preservation was an afterthought, and now we are seeing those consequences. Hospital filled with elderly patients who can't recover from routine procedures because they lack of muscle reserves. Nursing homes filled with people who lost independences not because of diseases, but because of preventable muscle loss. If there is one message I want you to take from this, is this: muscle mass is not optional. It's not aesthetic. It's not just for athletes. Muscle mass is a predictor for how well you age, how resilient you'll be to disease, how independently you live, and how long you'll survive. In the next video, I show you why 50 years of health advice has failed and what actually works today. This is Dr. Max. The public health establishment failed to prioritize this message. We need to spread it ourselves. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.